So my name is Alex. I was the first UK distributor of the Arduino, which is a tool many of you will have used in the past, and hopefully in the present. I have been running the IoT meetup now for 8 years in the UK. It's now the third largest community in the world on meetup.com, even though we're moving off the platform. I made the Goodnight Lamp. I've been working on the Goodnight Lamp and commercialized it in 2015. I wrote a book last year. I was head of innovation for an energy company. I'm writing a second book, which will come out next year. And I'm working with a company on climate change and IoT data, which is interesting, and also incubated, not incubated, whatever that is, by ING. So connection with Holland, where I have lived in the past. Related to a couple of things that I think are important before I get into this whole rant. This is a long conversation that we've been having as a community. The people who run ThingsCon are my friends. They are people who I love. They're people who I've worked with, I've collaborated with. Every time I come here, it's like coming to family, which is quite unique. And I'm sure that for you, some of you, it's your first time. I hope that you'll come back. I hope that you will talk to them about what you're doing as you go forward. But it is a very long conversation that we're all engaged in. And I'll come back to this concept of long conversations, because I think that's really important. In 2012, Usman Haq, who some of you might know because he was the founder of Patchbay, which is the first digital platform for IoT devices, invited me to help him organize an event called the Open Internet of Things Definition, which is still online. You can still find the documents from that. Off the back of that, we came up with what eventually was called Better IoT, which is online, which is an assessment tool for IoT devices. So you as a founder, as someone who is in the early stages of starting your product design, you can go through the assessment tool and you can kind of see some of the things that at the time the community thought were important. I think they still are pretty relevant. But that's kind of not what I wanted to talk about. I got very excited by the prospect of talking politics. And because I think that we have a bit of a problem in the community, the tech community at large. This isn't necessarily an IoT thing, but we have a problem of vilification, which is that we tend to over-focus on all the bad things that are being done by a set of very limited actors. And we obsess over these, and we talk about them, and we use them as inspiration points for other work. We use them as references over and over and over again. And sometimes I get the feeling that we live in a world with 3 brands. And I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about our ability to fight that fight. Because, you know, unless anybody in this room works at Google or Amazon, does anybody here work at Google or Amazon? Is there one? Is this, what's the person? No, that's not a person raising their hands. If those people are not in the room, then we're kind of, you know, it's great, but they're not in the room. And these are people who organize their own events, of course, but we sort of have a battle we're not necessarily going to be winning. And I also feel that we're somehow feeding the trolls by doing this. We're somehow giving them even more power than they already have. Psychologically, for ourselves also, to constantly be looking out for, ooh, what else have they done that's so terrible? You know, we're designers, we're creative people. I think that we need sources of inspiration that are broader than this. Also because a lot of really good stuff is happening in IoT that does not belong in and behind the doors of these kinds of organizations. And I think we have to remember this. Because otherwise we're sort of, you know, starting to paint a picture of doom and gloom. For those of you who've seen Apocalypse Now, this is from that film. Who here is a person who is below the age of 25? Raise your hands. Okay, keep your hand up, up. A little bit of exercise for everyone. Put your hand down if you have no, Twitter account. Put your hand down if you have no social media account at all. So the people left, you've got like a few things going on, but that's like 4 people, 5 people in the room-ish. So, or, you know, let's say 10 to make people happy. I heard complaints. We have also creating a kind of breeding ground for people to be very, very worried and very, very afraid of technology. We contribute to this in this community in our own way. We talk about the bad being done. We talk about things being terrible. We talk about the extreme scenarios all the time. And there's something I found the other day that's quite interesting called mean world syndrome, which is when you sort of over-focus entirely your storyline and your mental models on all the terrible things happening. And all you have to do is click on 3 links on social media in order for your entire feed to feed you that mean world as well. So I, wonder how we get to the point where we get slightly more creative about mean world syndrome. My friend James Bridle has this T-shirt design that he made a few years ago saying, the cloud is a lie, because it's essentially a bunch of hardware sitting there somewhere. It's not, the end-all and be-all. It has a physical presence. It has a physical presence we can address. It has a reality, a material reality we must remember. It has a cost. It has an impact. It has carbon emissions associated with it. It's not actually magic. We like to talk about design. We like to talk about the transformational aspects of design. I also think a lot of really bad stuff happens without design ever being involved. It's not everything is an actual design decision. Some decisions are leadership decisions. They're financial decisions. They are decisions where not a single designer is even in the building. And so how do we work there? How do we act there? I studied industrial design, like many of you. I studied interaction design, like a diminishing number of you. That's a really interesting question, because I, wonder about our ability to hold interesting concepts and interesting ideas that are design related in our head for long enough. Some of you, I think, have referred to the work of Superflux. In the past, we had discussions yesterday about some of their stuff. Superflux are one of maybe 3 examples of design-led companies today that make high-resolution work that people keep talking about over and over and over again. The other 2 I can think of is Tactical Tech and Projects by If and their frameworks. Super visual, super high-resolution use of design in order to make people think about stuff. And I think that's our job. The job of what we do fundamentally as a community is to make sure that an image, a concept, an idea, the things that you've prototyped across the last few days do not disappear into the ether of Instagram or a PowerPoint you'll never revisit, an idea you'll never build on top of, a thing that just kind of sifts through our lives and doesn't get held on to. And I think that ultimately we have to talk about making things more poppy, making things more popular in the ways in which we recognize popularity, which is unfortunately to engage with mass media means of communication. That's how terrible people get elected. It's how ideas actually move through our culture. We have to make sure that things that we discuss here today end up on television shows, that someone presents them to people in a science show, in a conservation show, I don't care which show, but they have to actually get outside of these rooms, this particular amphitheater, this museum, this country, this community. We have examples of this. We have examples of this throughout the time immemorial, and one of the examples is the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus was open for a very short period of time, and yet most of us know what it is, know what they did, know who taught there. How do we know this? How do we know stuff about a school that closed in 1933? Because there were exhibitions from 1939 in the Museum of Modern Art onwards. The number of exhibitions that the MoMA held of Bauhaus exhibitions, about 50 odd or so, since the time that they've actually shut down. So this stuff has to become part of visual culture for people in the very places where we're sitting. You know, I would want the Nieuwe Institute, to actually have a show that's called like the ThingsCon show or whatever, responsible IoT show. I want this stuff to be in front of the people who are actually not in this room with us, but having a coffee there because it's their Friday afternoon thing. I want this kid to go and see something and go like, oh, that's cool. I wonder what this is. Can I play with that? Can I learn anything about this? Can I absorb this in my family life? Can I change my parents' minds about technology? And it requires us essentially to start to move into a place of activism, I think, which is not a word that we necessarily want to use all the time, but I do sort of think that we're stuck kind of in the early stages of what activism eventually, you know, where activism comes in. We're at the kind of theory and research level of stuff. And eventually this has to become evangelism. It has to become activism, and that then maybe turns into change. There's lots of people who we can turn to for inspiration on how to do this. People who've done this on issues that are, of course, seem more important than what we do, but I think are, in relative terms, as important. If we look to the AIDS campaigns of the 80s, the AIDS campaigns were completely transformational because they utilized a strategy that was called inside-outside strategy. And the inside-outside strategy was you do highly visible, very public activism in the street, and you go inside government, inside government organizations to tell them exactly what you wanted because you've educated yourself with the language of government. There are parallels to what we talk about here. When we talk about regulation hand in hand with stickers and culture and, you know, crazy privacy fridges or whatever. So these people have something to teach us. Other people have things to teach us. People like James Baldwin have ideas to share with us and models to share with us. James Baldwin, one of the greatest writers on racial division in America, used to do these incredible television debates. He used to debate racism with terrible people on national TV. You know, can we go head to head with someone who works in a corporation which we despise and go, what you're doing is terrible on national TV? I think we should. I think we can. But that format, we have to embrace these kinds of formats. They're very powerful. Right now, the FBI has a notice to say that people shouldn't be buying Alexas because there's a danger. I mean, that's, you know, the FBI is saying something. It's not George Michael or Mariah Carey. Try to pick examples of people who are alive, Alex. It'd be great. I must learn to do that. There's, of course, extreme examples in activism. People like Malcolm X, you know, had great ideas of what activism, what the limits of activism might be. We're not at a place right now when we're talking about doing harm for our ideas. Or are we? Do we believe in them that much? Do we believe in them in the ways that kids believe in climate change? In England, with the Extinction Rebellion, we're just in the beginnings of violence, possible-ish. You know, people put themselves in harm's way for their ideas. Is that how much we care about this? If it's not, then let's have that be reflective of our actions, of the tools we use, of the things we decide to do or not do. And let's be clear about that. Let's put that in writing. We can be more gentle, of course. We can take Michelle Obama's stance, which is a stance of going and talking to people in their kitchens, in their communities. With her, of course, it's about engaging with people who disagree on the principles that she and her husband's administration wanted to represent, we can do that. We can go to communities that are using Alexa for healthcare purposes, and we think, oh, just don't. Well, let's go in and talk to them about that. Let's go in and help people. And more importantly also, let's continue to champion people who are unrepresented in these conversations about doing good. 3 examples of the people who are near me and who I love dearly in my community. The Restart Project, who might even be in this room, but I just haven't seen, who help people repair things, right? Flood Network, which is a network of sensors under bridges that someone can subscribe to in order to see whether the water under their local bridge is changing in a way that is dangerous or not. This idea has been prototyped, done, dusted years ago. Can't find any money. Nobody wants to invest in this. And this is a 6-year-old idea. Ben Ward, who created this, has had to take a full-time job because he couldn't find support for this. Alasdair Davis, who is also a Shuttleworth Fellow but is seconded from the London Zoo, does work putting tags on animals and helping with conservation, where they are, what they're doing. These are important uses of technologies. And they're ethical and they're doing the right thing. We have to kind of do this, and we have to do this for the next 10, 20 years. We can't be thinking about what we're doing and how we're doing it at, the end of a decade like we are today, thinking, oh, it's 2020 next. Should we just do something else? No, we can't. We have to stick to this for a really long time. People have a history of sticking to conversations for a really long time. The one I'll give you an example of is SIAM, le Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne, which is essential and was essential for creating the entire modernist movement. It was 30 years of conversations, yearly debates, publications. They just published the proceedings of these meetings. You can find them in every single design library you have around you. It's, it was an extremely important thing because it lasted, because people could hear about it and go, I'll go next year. You always have to be there for people to go next year. And maybe it means that we have to develop some KPIs somehow to take, terrible business lingo into this. Let's have a plan. Let's make a plan. Let's make sure this room is constantly filled with at least 50% students, 50% professionals, a quarter corporate, a quarter not, whatever. Let's have some objectives. Let's really okay, you can't let go of this idea. It was a nice drawing for today. In the next thing, I want you to build up on this idea, and I want you to showcase it. But let's have some longevity to these activities. And let's capture other people's perspectives. We, I think, are accused in the community of being, a little bit European about stuff. It's like, great, well, let's play with other people's ideas. Let's get people who live in farming communities to tell us about how they're using sensors for soil maintenance for smallhold farming. Let's get people in China to tell us about what data and privacy means for them. Let's try to see if we can build ideas collectively. And if we can't do it collectively, at least locally. Let's go and help people run their own events and do their own thinking and come up with their own solutions. Lots of people here today, lots of young people here today. Please, please, please just do a PhD about this if you care. Because how many people here are in academia? Raise your hands. Yeah, that never happens. You will never go to an event which is not an academic event that has this many academics. And the people who will probably offer you a PhD are in this room. The people who will offer you a PhD on this topic, on these topics of ethical behavior in IoT. Because unfortunately, this isn't an industry. Let's be clear. This is one of the few events in the world that is focused on these topics. And just because it's an event doesn't mean it's anything but an event right now. It's a community of practice, it's a community of ideas, but it's not an industry. You can Google ethical design into LinkedIn jobs and you will not find anything. And that's really important for you to know. If you're young and you're interested in this stuff and you're at a bachelor's level, do a master's. If you're at a master's level, start looking at PhDs. Because that's how you're going to dig into this. And then people will come and snap you up. But if you're at a master's level and you go out into the world and you think, I'm totally going to find a job that's going to require me to think about this stuff, we're not there yet. We're nowhere near there yet. Who here offers internships for people who think about these things? 1, 2, 3, please grab these people after. Those are 4 or 5 people in this room who might have internships for you. That's not a lot. And we're a small community who are thinking deeply about this. But your universe as a young person will have to be about keeping an eye on this while you do something else. While you pay the bills in another way, which leads me to my last slide, you'll be happy to know. Let's get some real money behind this stuff. Let's make sure that everybody applies for every ounce of Horizon 2020 money that is out there. Let's make sure as a community that ThingsCon is sponsored by the European Commission year on year for the next 10 years, because these are topics that the European Commission loves. And next generation internet is there, and that's terrific, but just more money, more resources. Let's make sure these events continue to be something that's, enjoyable to run and gets bigger and more exciting, and that the love continues. So with that, I thank you, and I thank ThingsCon for inviting me again.